All right, so what's going on, guys? So yes, I'm back. Yes, I still have the Galant. I'm still working on it. A long time since I posted. I think the last video I posted, I was updating you guys on what was going on. I told you I did drop the block off at the machine shop. That was actually back in June, I believe. And that's kind of been the holdup. This whole time, the block has been at the machine shop. They have been definitely taking their time. I have not been getting progress, updates whatsoever. And in addition to it just being a holdup of not having the block, it kind of made me not want to work on the car. Because after a couple months, when I initially dropped the block off, we talked about a 4 to 6 wait time, which I was okay with. I think the video I posted was actually almost a month after, because I was planning on keeping it rolling. But some good things did happen from that. I did change my plans a little bit, because initially the plan was just to get the built motor, put an LSD in my front wheel drive transmission, and then just send it. But being that I had so much extra time, I decided to go ahead and do something I said I was going to do with the car from the get-go, and that's to do the all-wheel drive swap. So of course, as you guys know, it's like 3 or 4 years ago at this point, I picked up the all-wheel drive 2G rear end for this car and just kind of had it sitting to the side. I didn't want to dive into it just because of the expense, and I wanted to get the car up and running quickly. So given all this extra time that I had, I decided, hey, you might as well go ahead and do the all-wheel drive swap while I wait. So now I do have to apologize because I lost the beginning of the video, basically, of me doing the disassembly. So I'm going to do my best to try to go over what needs to be done, but again, spoiler alert, it's already done, so you'll see the all-wheel drive parts already in the car. Because I am excited about the car. We got a whole new direction, some things that really wouldn't have happened. I didn't have this extra almost year tacked on because of the engine build. With that said, let's go ahead and head around to the back of the car, and I'll show you guys how to get started on your all-wheel drive swap. Now, actually, before we head to the back of the car, I do want to tell you guys the all-wheel drive swap, at least for the back end, is actually pretty easy. The 2G rear subframe is pretty much a direct bolt-on. The first step you're going to have to do is actually to drop the stock rear subframe, the OEM one. And again, that's pretty simple. So the first thing I did was go ahead and remove my suspension. So of course I have coilovers, but it's the same for the stock suspension. Just remove that bolt on the bottom and then remove the bolts on the top. I went ahead and pulled mine completely out just so they were out of the way. Then we want to remove anything that's connected to the subframe. So you'll have trailing arms that actually go here. The bolt is going to be accessed through that hole, which normally has a little plastic plug or rubber plug, and it connects to the bottom of your knuckle right there. You're also going to remove your toe arms. Again, a bit of a spoiler, I do have Volk arms on this car, but you're going to go ahead and remove those, and really anything that connects the knuckle to the subframe. Subframe itself is just held in with 4 bolts. Like same thing with your gas tank. Of course, you have some hoses that attach to it. You have some hoses from the filler neck that you need to remove. So like I said, guys, it's not a whole lot to taking out the rear subframe and the rear gas tank. You're looking at, I don't know, 12, 14 bolts, something like that total. Not a whole lot to it. So once we got everything out, then it was time to do some actual all-wheel drive work. So the first thing I did was go ahead and cut the holes for the new fuel senders. So whereas the OEM, you just have the one hole that's in the middle where you can get to your fuel pump, with the all-wheel drive, you'll need to cut 2 separate holes. You're gonna need to cut 2 separate holes on either side of the car. Now, fortunately, the holes are already outlined in the car. They're just underneath some sound deadening. So what you need to do is just get, a flathead screwdriver, something to pry up on it, and chip that sound deadening away enough where you can see those holes. You can't miss them. Again, it's two squares. I actually used my factory one. You also don't need to use riv nuts. I use riv nuts just because I have them here. I actually like using riv nuts for small, like light duty jobs like that. And it makes it easier to take it on and off. So of course, if you use self-tappers, if you take those off enough, of course, they can end up stretching the hole and then not securing in place properly. So that's why I use riv nuts. At least that's how I justified it to myself. Again, but then of course they're not necessary. It's just something nice to have. And again, I have it, so why not? So of course, the easy way to do this, and I guess I really should have led with this, is that if you can find an all-wheel drive car, definitely pick that up. It'll save a lot of headache. Because a lot of small things that you're going to need to pick up that you may not necessarily have thought about. Like when I first got my subframe, of course, I picked it up by itself. It was a complete pullout, but it didn't have the all-wheel drive sending unit for the gas tank, and it was just missing a few other pieces. So these 2 plates that are going to cover the holes that you just cut for the sending unit, of course, you can get them straight off of GSX, or you can get them from any 2G or 7th gen Galant. The only problem is that you're only going to get 2 of the total 3 plates that you need. So on those cars, you're just going to have that center plate plus one of the side plates, and you'll need 2 of the side plates. Now, fortunately, those 2 side plates are both the same. They both have pretty much the same curve on them. So all you need to do is find 2 cars. They are interchangeable. This little rubber piece with a wire harness pass through, is different on both of them. This one is from a 2G, and then this one is from a 7th gen. They are shaped the same. They both work the same, so you need to pick those up. So next thing we're going to do is go ahead and remove the rear subframe bolts. Of course, these are what we're going to call our shorter bolts, because we're going to keep these bolts after we knock them out, and we're going to put them in the holes that we cut for the front. That now going to be our new front subframe bolts. So now I did go ahead and measure it. I'm not sure if it's the same for the Eclipse. I would imagine it would be, but I can't verify it. But it's probably pretty close if it's not the same. So you kind of get the idea of where you need to cut. Because what we're going to need to do is, after we cut away the initial part of the body, is we're going to have to cut off that little square cap, because that cap goes over the head of our subframe bolt and holds it in place, keeps it from spinning. And then from there, you're just going to get one of your new all-wheel drive subframe bolts, which are longer, and just drop it into those existing holes, and then eventually we're going to just weld those holes back up, and that's all you have to do. So for the front bolts, again, the hole is there on the bottom of the subframe. What I did is I just take a drill bit. It ended up being a spade bit because that's all I had that was long enough. Drill it through the bottom to mark the hole, and again, you can see where the hole is behind the rear seat, really kind of tucked into the corner, and I just made a pilot hole. So once I used the pilot hole, I did go ahead and use my step bit to make that hole bigger. You can use anything to really cut the hole. The key thing is really just to mark that hole where you need to drill. So of course that does bring us to our first real problem. We'll have to do some actual work here to get the all-wheel drive in. Because there wasn't originally a bolt there, there's nothing to hold the bolt in place to keep it from spinning. So I did search around for a little bit to see what everybody was using to kind of fix that problem. So after doing some searching, I found really 3 ways that guys are using to secure that bolt. Some guys are just dropping the bolt in and then welding it to the inside of the frame. Now, I'm not that great of a welder, as you guys know. And I couldn't really figure out how I would get a good purchase on it and really be able to see in it, especially with the hole that I cut. I didn't want to make the hole way too big and end up chopping the car up. So I didn't really like that idea. Other guys are using, they're just welding a nut onto the top of the bolt and then holding it down with a socket as they tighten the subframe down. Now that's a good option. It does work. So my problem with that is actually twofold. If you wanted to ever remove that bolt, you would have to have that hole exposed so that you can get to the top of it. So personally, I want to seal that hole back up, so that really wasn't going to work. And I kind of thought about that after I welded the nut onto the top of it. So what I ended up doing was actually a combination of all 3 of those. I took some of the metal that I pulled from the gas tank when I cut those access holes, and I welded these little bits onto the bolt that will keep it from spinning in the subframe. That way I can seal the hole up from the top, and in the future, if I ever need to, for whatever reason, I need to take the subframe back down, I don't have to cut a new hole, and I can just take the subframe back out. Now, what you'll also notice is once you get back under the car is that now you have 3 subframe bolts, because of course the all-wheel drive subframe is wider than the front-wheel drive subframe. So now you'll have a little small bolt hanging in the middle of it that you'll just need to remove or cut off. Much in the same way that you did with the rear, you can just cut it open, cut the cap off, and just get rid of the bolt altogether. Of course, that bolt is really only loosely in there. Again, it's held in with the same cap. And if you just leave it in there and you don't weld it, it will rattle while you drive. So I cut the bolt off flush with the frame, and then I welded it to the frame itself. So now I don't have to worry about it ever moving or breaking free. Of course, you probably noticed I got a big hole. I cut my trunk, my spare tire well out. For no particular reason, because you don't need to do that to do the all-wheel drive swap. It will fit just fine. So of course my wheels don't fit in the spare tire well anyway, and of course now that I'm upgrading my brakes, I can't go with a donut if I were to need to change a tire. So it really didn't serve a purpose. It does allow you better access to the rear subframe bolts, and I know it was a huge help, especially because I did all this work by myself. It was a huge help to be able to stand in the trunk, or where the trunk would be, and hold the subframe up while I raised it with my floor jack, because I'll end up adding a support beam or something to that area just in case I do want to use the trunk for whatever reason. It's going to negate any weight saving. But those are really my reasons. Basically because I had a cutoff wheel and I was there. That was the whole reason behind that. So now we're able to start installing some of our all-wheel drive stuff. So with the gas tank, I was able to use 3 of the 4 factory bolts, and we had to move the one on the driver's side, on the front driver's side. Actually, we had to move that over to a different hole, again, that was already there. So again, you have 2 choices. You can drill a hole, which is what I initially did, was drill a small hole up through the top and then drop a bolt in. You can do what I saw some other guys on YouTube do, which is where they just took a nut, hammered the nut into that hole and made it flush, and then just welded the nut into the frame. And that's actually the route I ended up going, because I was trying to think, how can I drop a bolt in here? So it's a lot tighter space. How can I secure it And how can I secure that bolt in case I want to remove the gas tank in the future? And that just seemed like the easiest way to do it. Again, so you're just going to widen that hole a little bit, put a nut in there, weld the nut to the frame, and then you'll just take a bolt on that subframe and run it up from the bottom. So for me, I thought that was the easiest path to take. So once I made sure that everything was lining up properly, I went ahead and pulled everything back out, and I went ahead and installed my subframe bushings. So they are machined to be an exact fit. So I guess the first step in installing these aluminum bushings will be to remove the old factory bushings. So I ended up cutting mine out first and then using my reciprocating saw to kind of cut the sleeve away. But what I realized later is that it probably would have been easier if I had let the bushing intact, especially for the four corners, and I had a press, because I probably would have been able to push the bushings out altogether because my bushings were in good shape. Now, if yours are torn already, that probably won't work. It'll probably just pop right out and you'll end up having to do it the way I did it. But again, hindsight being 20/20, doesn't really matter. Just get the bushings out by any means. But you do need to get that metal sleeve that's around the bushing as well. So once they're out, again, at this point, it's just time to get a sledgehammer. I got a piece of wood just to protect the aluminum because, of course, aluminum is a soft metal. And, of course, you don't want to just start wailing on it. The first couple of taps, you just want to make sure that it's going in there straight. And once you get it, you know, a quarter of an inch or so into the subframe, then you can start hammering on it, and it does slide in. Now, before I did this, I did go ahead and sand it with some 320, spray some WD-40 in the hole, and I even popped them in the freezer for a little bit to see if I could shrink them just a little bit to help out. So after using the hammer method, I did get an idea to use these long subframe bolts and some washers to help push them in. And it actually seemed to work a lot better and a lot faster. And I'm sure my neighbors appreciate me finding another quieter method other than me just wailing on it with a hammer. So then we're going to go ahead and move on to this piece here. So I picked up this piece from Rick's Racing. They're actually located in West Virginia. So this is another one of those pieces that's going to be hard to get if you don't have a parts code. Now, fortunately for me, Rick's Racing actually happened to have one in stock. One of my Instagram followers, shout out to you, actually suggested this website to me. I had never heard of them, and they happen to have one in stock. And so when I bought the piece from Rick's Racing, it actually came with the two pieces, the mount for the rear and then the center mount. Now, for this chassis, the center mount doesn't fit. So the rear bracket is pretty much a direct fit. I did have to grind off just a little corner of it, of the bracket itself, and a little corner of the car, but not a whole lot had to be done. You just have to line it up. So if for whatever reason you're really thinking about doing an all-wheel drive swap, but you can't find that bracket, it's really no big deal. You don't have to use the OEM part. It's really just a bracket to hold your drive shaft. So I'll show you this picture. A guy just used a piece of square tubing with some bolts dropped in it. And that's probably the better option just because you can duplicate that. The studs, the threads on the studs were actually stripped. And the entire usable part of the stud that I needed was stripped. So I had to cut the original studs off and then drill holes through those studs and then drop in my new bolts that I picked up from the hardware store. So with that in mind, that's why I say that may not even be the best option. You can just get a piece of square tubing or some piece of tubing, drop in some bolts, and you're good to go. And now you don't have to worry about trying to track down a parts car or try to track down that piece, which again, I ended up paying $200 for both of those pieces and ended up not using one and had to modify the other one. So when you really think about it, it wasn't really worth the money. But again, that's a learning process, and that's why I'm sharing it with you guys. Just get a piece of square tubing, drop some bolts in it. Instead of spending $200, you might spend $20. And it does the same thing because its only job is to hold up that rear section of the drive shaft. So of course, once I got it in, I got a couple tacks in place. I went ahead and mounted the subframe and the rear part of that drive shaft up again in the diff, of course. I went ahead and mounted everything and made sure everything was even. The drive shaft doesn't run exactly down the middle of the tunnel. It's actually offset a little bit to one side, and you can really see that when you look at the gas tank because the gas tank is actually cut offset to allow the exhaust to run by it. So you want to keep that in mind. You're not aiming for the center of the exhaust tunnel. You're actually aiming for the center of the subframe, which is kind of, I use my reference point. And with the gas tank and everything mounted, you can see it does still go right down the middle of the hole, and you can see the little cutout for the exhaust. So everything ended up, now you don't have to worry too much about the alignment. The bracket really only fits one way. So you really don't have to worry about messing it up too much. Just use the frame as a guide. Lining it up will be pretty easy. So of course the gas tank has to go in first, followed by the subframe. The all-wheel drive knuckles fit in place of the factory knuckles. Again, they are direct bolt on. Now as far as the diff, I'm using an auto LHD diff, which is a JFH. It's the logo that's on it. Now you will have to use an auto diff. It doesn't necessarily have to be the LSD. So if you do want to use an LSD diff, just keep in mind to get the LSD axles because they are a different length. The non-LSD auto axles are the same length, where the inner cups are actually different. Install your axles, install your trailing arms, your tow arms, everything else, and go ahead and button the car up, and everything will fit just like it did beforehand. So in case you're wondering, you don't have to upgrade to the Evo brakes. You can run the factory V6 disc brakes on the rear of this car. So if you don't want to spend the money on the Brembos, you can just run stock disc brakes from a V6 Eclipse, which I happen to have for sale. So if you're interested, let me know. That's really it for the back of the car. I think I'm going to do a 3-part video with the rear end being one. Then I'll do one on the fuel system and then one on the front. So I want to give you guys fairly detailed explanation of what needs to happen. So of course, if you have any questions or comments, go ahead and leave them down below or hit me up on Instagram. Again, that link is in the description. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.